Okay, here's the second part of the demography lecture for Valley High School. This is the last part that you saw. So now there are four, this is the pickup point for us here. There are four key themes to this part of the lecture when we talk about demography. And we're talking about urban sociology specifically. First of all, when we talk about cities, we know that cities and urban life vary according to time and place. Since the ideas of cities have been presented to us some 10,000 years ago, the urban scene, the urban landscape has been created and recreated time and time again. Also, cities reflect and intensify society and culture. While cities everywhere do vary, every city looks a little different. Even in this country, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania feels different than New Orleans, Louisiana, which feels different than San Francisco, California would feel, which would look and feel differently than Charleston, West Virginia. U.S. cities, really cities everywhere, represent powerful statements about the contemporary forces of industrial capitalism as well. We see the fingerprints of capitalism all over every city in this country. We're looking at buildings, industries, the mortar, block, and glass, as you would say, with all the buildings that are around. Third, cities reveal the best and the worst of the human condition. You'll find the best things seemingly in terms of humanity, in terms of wealth, in terms of what you can strive to achieve and accomplish and realize in cities. Conversely, you will see some of the worst of the human condition. You'll see prejudices, homelessness, poverty, mental illness, violence, starvation, hunger. So you'll see the good, the best of the best, and you'll see the bad and really the worst of the worst in cities. Also, cities offer the promise but not always the reality of a better life. Since the time of the ancient Greeks, people have recognized that the city holds the promise of a better life, but many city dwellers struggle to survive daily. Now, today the city is studied with the guidance of three disciplinary themes. First of all, social psychology. Next, urban ecology and geography. And finally, urban political economy. So we'll talk a little bit about each of these. Now, social psychology emphasizes how the social environment stimulates people. And the social environment stimulates us differently. We talked in class a little bit about kind of where you guys live and how far it is for you to get from where you live to Charleston, which is our urban center in this state, if you will. The social environment does stimulate us. We want to go to cities because we want to see things. We want to take in certain sights. We want to experience diversity. We want to watch performances. We want to shop. We want to eat food. Whatever the case may be, it stimulates us. Some people like it. They enjoy the high stimulation, the diversity. Others do not care for it, and they don't enjoy the high stimulation and the diversity and the seemingly faster and more impersonal pace. Now, second, urban ecology and geography. This perspective investigates the significance of the city's location in relation to natural resources and how many people occupy the city spatially. Natural resources are very important to consider. The founding of the earliest cities in this country were founded on waterways, on rivers or seaports, because that was the main route of transportation. That was the main source of transportation, especially for the early colonies in this country. Urban political economy highlights the importance and influence of global rather than local political and economic decision making on a city. You may not think about it, but decisions that are made across the globe impact you as an individual. And that's something else that we kind of look at. And a lot of those decisions happen in cities in other parts of the country or other parts of the world. Gas prices are the best example I can think of. Decisions that are made on a national level here by product or by virtue of decisions that are made in the Middle East affect prices of oil, affect how much we are paying in America to import oil from these countries, impact how much you are paying for gasoline to put in your vehicle. Best example I could think of. So those decisions made across the globe are affecting you and how much you are paying to drive your car to school. Now, the United States' most populated cities from 1980 to 2007 were pretty much in what we call the snow belt, and really the Northeast. I mean, you're looking at cities, as you can kind of see. You got New York City, you have Boston as well, Chicago, Illinois, and you can kind of see kind of the states and the areas in the blue. Recently, we've seen what's called the Sun Belt phenomenon. We're seeing recent declining populations of eastern and specifically northeastern cities in the U.S. I won't bombard you with statistics and numbers, but if you looked at population growth and decline, and you look specifically at New York City or Boston, Massachusetts, you're going to find, for example, those two big cities have lost significant numbers of people, and they have relocated to the Sun Belt cities, largely in the Southwest, where the weather's warmer. Businesses are enticed to relocate because taxes are lower, seemingly higher quality of life, less population, less crowding, less pollution, all those things. So people have moved to the Sun Belt areas, to the southern, western, and southwestern cities of the U.S. So what does it mean to be urban? It's really more of a subjective issue. If you ask people who are born and raised in cities, you would get some different responses. Someone who has lived on the streets as a homeless person for most of his or her life would give you a very different explanation about what it means to be urban than, let's say, someone who is very well off and who works, lives and plays in a city and makes a lot of money and enjoys the art and the culture and so forth. So you would get very different explanations just with those two people. Sprawl is a term that's used to describe what I like to call the urban spread. When you get a city, what tends to happen is that city tends to grow physically in size. It may grow in numbers in terms of people who live there, but sprawl happens everywhere. It's kind of like, I imagine, like if you have Jell-O and you plop it down on a table and it kind of like runs out and kind of like expands a little bit. Or maybe with pudding, that might be another example. You plop it down on a table and it just kind of runs and spreads out a little bit. And then at some point it stops, kind of, but not really. It still kind of like eeps, kind of oozes and spreads a little more. That's what sprawl is kind of like. You get these cities, and then you get the suburbs that are kind of like cities. They're not quite as densely populated, but they look and feel like cities. And then they kind of spread out. People move in because they're trying to get out of the big cities. So more of them move to the suburbs. And then the suburbs end up becoming just like the cities that began. They become overcrowded and overpolluted and overpopulated. So then people kind of spread out a little more. And with them, they take these urban trappings. And you can see there's the idea of the city and this urban philosophy just kind of continues to spread out into what was once considered the countryside. Sprawl uses up land even when population decreases. You can have places like in the northeast of this country, they've actually lost population numbers. People have left, but still cities annex surrounding areas or expand their physical space. Sprawl increases residents' dependence upon automobiles, creates traffic congestion, also creates pollution and wastes natural resources. So sprawl is a big problem. For the past 3 decades, more than 200 new cities in North America have been located at the fringes of older cities. So some possible solutions to sprawl, to urban sprawl, include purchasing and preserving open space. We've seen a lot of places, well, not a lot of places, but we've seen some states like the state of Washington out west have actually preserved what they call these green areas. That they place a proverbial rope around a rural area and say, okay, by law you cannot expand here in big cities. This is always going to be rural space. So that's one way to fight sprawl. Also, setting urban growth boundaries, revitalizing existing cities and towns. A lot of poor inner cities have been revitalized through gentrification, where people with money, upper middle class and wealthy people, have invested money in rebuilding or refurbishing these old buildings and these old, as part of this revitalization project. And some of these inner cities are starting to thrive again. And also pursuing transit-oriented approaches. Instead of taking automobiles, all of us, everywhere, maybe carpooling or really riding a bus, train, metro, subway, things of that sort. And then we'll end with this, hyper-urbanization. This is the rapid growth and overwhelming sprawl of cities in developing nations. So we're also seeing sprawl happening in the underdeveloped part of the world as well. And this is called hyperurbanization. And we'll go ahead and call that the end of this part. Thanks.